everyone. I'm Tolde Stefanos, and this is ERISAT's The Power of One program. Today is June 11th, 2024. Dr. Isabelle Schlapfer is my guest today. Dr. Isabelle is research manager within the Impact and Learning team at Internews and the author of the report Flight and Fight. In this report, Dr. Isabelle documents the challenges of 25 exiled media organizations from about 20 countries where press freedom is not allowed. Eritrea is unfortunately one such country, with very few who managed to escape. Eritrean journalists who started independent newspapers in the late 1990s have been imprisoned since September 18, 2001. And sadly, 23 years later, the whereabouts of those disappeared journalists is still unknown. Prior to joining Internews, Dr. Isabelle worked as a researcher at the Interdisciplinary Center for Gender Studies and at the Swiss Federal Institute of Aquatic Science and Technology, where she designed and implemented research projects and evaluations in the areas of humanitarian technologies, cash transfers, water and sanitation and hygiene, and environmental governance. She was also managing editor of the Journal of Humanitarian Affairs. Dr. Isabelle holds a PhD in humanitarianism and conflict response from the University of Manchester and a master's degree in political science and gender studies from the University of Bern. Welcome, Dr. Isabelle, and thank you for being here. Our main topic will be your Flight and Fight report, but before we get to that, there are some interesting points in your bio I would like you to say a bit more about. Humanitarianism and conflict response is the subject of your PhD studies. What is it about, and how does the conflict response part relate or differ from conflict resolution?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to have me here in this session. I'm very humbled to be here and speak to you. So I did a PhD on basically the impact on humanitarian innovations on the accountability in humanitarian aid. So I was looking at how new technologies developed by corporations affect the way humanitarian aid is kind of like delivered, and how this shapes the relationships between different actors and the relationship with the beneficiaries. That's a bit in a nutshell. And your second question was the relation of?
The conflict response versus conflict resolution. What's the response part?
I mean, like response, like in a wider sense. I mean, I was looking at specifically at how cash transfers can be more effective and in a way more responsive to the needs of beneficiaries. And I think that at the end, that's like the goal of humanitarian aid, to provide help and support to those in need in a way that is most meaningful to them. So that basically was kind of like the goal to identify and explore in more detail in my PhD thesis.
Right. You also mentioned humanitarian technologies as tools of your research. I think cash transfers is one of them. So what is included in these technologies, in these humanitarian technologies?
I mean, I was specifically looking at how prepaid card and digital cash transfers help beneficiaries, and also what challenges arise from the use of digital cash transfers. You know, how to ensure that data is properly protected, the privacy is kept safe for those people who receive cash more and more in a digital way, rather than just kind of like handing over an envelope of cash.
Right. Thank you for that background information. So getting back to the topic of the day, your Flight and Fight research was conducted between October 2023 and April 2024. Of course, they faced life-threatening situations in their home countries. That's where they had to leave. But you also uncovered structural and organizational challenges they face in their host countries. What are these structural and organizational challenges, and how are they navigating them?
Yeah, so we identified or we grouped challenges into two sets, like what you just said, structural and organizational level challenges. Structural challenges are largely beyond the power of the media outlets to resolve, but have a significant impact on outlets' operations. And examples are like registration issues in a host country, navigating through complex regulations that are difficult to understand, often also in a language that they do not speak. Banking issues, it's difficult to open a bank account in a host country, sending money back into the home country, economic sanctions that might have been imposed from your host country into your home country, which interferes potentially with funding priority of donors. And then, of course, a rather complicated or difficult relationship with social media. And then on the other hand, as you said, Exiled media face like challenges on an organization level, and they are really determined and creative in their efforts to overcome challenges they face on an outlet level. And these challenges, they apply on the operational level when it comes to work, like with staff dispersed in different locations, often working in a hybrid model. Some staff is fully exiled, other staff might still operate from within the home country. Editorial challenges, that it just takes much more time and resources to develop a story and report. Then the whole challenges of knowing and understanding the audience interest, but also information needs from afar, and how to measure and engage with your audience. How do you build a business model in exile? And then the whole issue of censorship and transnational repression, because for many outlets, even when they leave the home country, threats and harassment, physical and digital, they do not stop once they moved into exile. They are transnational in that sense. Yeah.
On the organizational part, I mean, I can attest to ERISAT, having human resource challenges all the time. So we try to get partially paid staff and volunteer staff, and with all the inefficiencies that comes with. Yeah. So, Dr. Isabelle, social media is a double-edged sword. It's an enabling technology for exiled media like ERISAT to disseminate information freely, but it can also be a harassment and surveillance tool for the home governments and their allies. How are exiled journalists navigating these two opposing currents?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Maybe just to add a bit to what you just said. I mean, as you said, like social media can be highly beneficial as means of circumventing censorship. Often when websites are blocked, for example, but as you said, they come with huge challenges as well, for example, around algorithm change, kind of like that constant fight for visibility among a flood of disinformation, the issues of content over moderation, like some outlets even have issues with the verification of their account in the first place. And it offers a window for online harassment and intimidation, trolling, or even like hacking of social media accounts. Yeah. And in that sense, especially the safety aspects, it's just feeds into how important it is to have like, because as I said, they are structural issues that outlets cannot directly change or kind of like impact, but the media development or support community can take an important role in advocate towards social media, and take a stance and try to change certain issues or raise awareness of the challenges that they face themselves. and then of course like having an advanced digital safety net that helps protect them from, as I said, like hacking of social media accounts, for example.
Are there organizations who can help these exiled media organizations in terms of the tools, the preventive tools that can be used, anti-hacking, for example, or to reduce the threats, you know?
I mean, like this is part of like individual media development organizations, and these organizations provide different type of supports, and digital safety training is certainly something that that these organizations do and can help with for exiled medias.
Right. Okay. The other challenge is, you know, in engagement with the communities that you serve. So social media comments can be a useful engagement tool with such target audiences. But through trolling and other divisive techniques, the comments section is often taken off topic using inflammatory language most of the time that hijacks the core message, diminishing the positive engagement that one was trying to build. How big of a problem do you think this is, and are there better ways to engage target audiences?
I mean, so working in exile requires probably a more detailed and nuanced understanding of the information landscape and audience interests that might have been kind of like more intuitive when working from inside a country before moving into exile. And I think especially the kind of like understanding the information landscape includes, for example, assessing or to assess like the technical level of expertise of the target audience, for example, when it comes to the use of VPN, because it kind of like helps to identify what format or what content can be produced. It also, I mean, there are ways of kind of like maintain a core audience, for example, creating a sense of community with your core audience, or using emotional content carefully, but also trying to avoid a news burnout. Or some outlets found it helpful to kind of like ground information in practical steps for the reader or for the audience that can help maintain audience engagements. And we had like a few creative suggestions or ways some of the outlets are already doing this. For example, one outlet co-develops stories with the audience themselves. So they kind of like buy the audience in through co-developing certain content. Or another outlet had like an audience engagement officer, and then they did like small surveys, and they had like a WhatsApp group to have like just like another level of conversation with the audience. And they had like webinars around a news story that they produced, and got somehow direct feedback that way from the audience. And I mean, some of the outlets try to reach new audience segments just by kind of like getting out of their comfort zone. Like some have started producing podcasts just to reach different audience, or they have like newsletters or like PDF weekly summaries, just to find in a way or tap into their audience and try to kind of like get that sense of community with them.
So this will be like diversifying the content through storytelling with the members of the community.
Yeah, that's exactly what this specific outlet did.
Right.
I mean, it does not come without challenges, as they explained to me, but they experienced it as a positive way of tapping and just kind of like creating that loyalty as well from the audience.
All right. So as you point out in your report, Exiled media organizations are severely under-resourced, where their staff is often forced to hold multiple roles. In ERISAT, for example, this can put people in responsibilities beyond their skill sets. And not surprisingly, speed and content quality, which are critical to media credibility, can be negatively affected by this. How serious is this problem?
In the report, I talk about how exiled media outlets, when journalists leave their home country and they move into exile, they suddenly also become editors or managers of a media outlet and fundraisers because they rely on donor funding. And so they add like multiple new roles to what they originally might have done, namely reporting. And this all happens under intense time pressure and restricted resources, which comes on top of all other issues when it comes to editorial or operational work, such as that reporting just requires more time and is more resource intense when working partly or fully exiled, because they need to, working with sources is more challenging because there are increased safety risks and they need to stay anonymous, or the verification of information becomes more difficult. That's something that some of the outlets have reported. This all, in a way, also complicates to build audience trust because you must be more anonymous and in a way protective of your sources, right, and your information, because of the safety of undercover staff and sources. And then also, the longer away you are from the home country, the harder it becomes to stay attuned to what is happening inside the country. You also really rely on those sources from within the home country. But I think kind of like building up and generating the skills that it takes for exiled media outlets to not only being journalists, but also managers of an outlet and also fundraisers. That is a lot. There are a lot of hats they have to wear at the same time and get on speed with this at the same time.
Right. The organizations you studied span multiple continents, from Latin America to Africa and Myanmar.
So we include, I talk to 25 exiled media outlets spanning from, like on a global scale, like from South America, from the African region, the MENA region, Asia, to just have this kind of like broader understanding of under what circumstances exiled media work.
Do you find some of them are having relatively better success than others, especially in the areas of manpower that you mentioned, where people have to play multiple roles to get the organizations going?
Some have managed to kind of like build almost like an operational buffer zones between editorial and fundraising. Like multiple outlets told me how important it is to kind of like maintain that independence, the conversation with donors about donor funding and where the money goes, and then keep kind of like the editorial, the actual work, reporting work separate from the two. This has mainly been successful in outlets that had enough funding to build those organizational structures where you can have separate almost departments or teams, but other outlets, they contain of like 2 people and they run the whole show. So it is something that they want to work towards, to have this more like organizational structure, but not all of them are in the same level of that process.
So in terms of funding, most of them tend to be funded by grant funding. Did you see any restriction in how independently they can run their editorial stuff because of this funding, this type of
I mean,
funding?
yeah, I mean, I can't really say like detailed examples. I think it is much more about, I mean, that often the Exiled media outlets are the expert of a certain region or of their home country, and they might know best what the information needs are of their home audience. And I think it's just important to have that dialogue between these outlets and potential funding portfolios or priorities of donors, and kind of like elevate that conversation between them. So the funding goes to the areas where the outlets feel is the most important area for them to fulfill their mission, which is to produce independent, high quality content for their target audience.
Right. The other challenge is difficulty getting direct feedback from the target audience, especially from the home countries. And this is certainly a problem for ERISAT. As an example, World Bank data shows Eritrea having less than 2% internet connectivity. This prevents Eritreans from using encrypted tools like WhatsApp to share their ideas securely. So it's very difficult to get feedback. And then since Eritreans cannot access social media locally in Eritrea, ERISAT is forced to broadcast content using expensive satellite channel, which essentially is a one-way conversation so far. How do these exiled media outlets measure the level of engagement and overall impact they're making in their home countries?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it is something that I mean, many exiled media outlets struggle with. As you said, like there might be risks or issues for audiences in the first place to access content, and even like to indicate approval or support for an outlet, like resharing content on social media, for example. And this just produces, together with, for example, the use of VPN to access content when websites are blocked, this just produces, to some extent, unreliable or incomplete data about consumption habits and information needs. And this is the question, like, how do you measure reach and impact beyond clicks, basically, right? And I think there, in terms of like support to exiled media, it's definitely help them maximizing their use of digital analytics tools or develop alternative approaches, such as surveys where possible, or WhatsApp groups, as some outlets did, just to understand their audience needs, preferences, and technical know-how, where reach and impact is just, yeah, it's difficult to measure through incomplete data. And I think, especially when it comes to the definitions of impact, just have like alternative or more flexible definitions what impact might mean, where reach can't be measured in like a traditional or typical way. And some outlets, for example, they talk about impact more as like awareness raised, or policy change, or changes in laws and regulations, or increased awareness of the outlet's brands, rather than the actual kind of like consumption of content.
Right. How about surveys? I mean, do any of the ones that you studied conduct surveys in the home countries or even in their diaspora populations to see what level of engagement they're making in those communities?
Yeah, some of them do. Again, like some of them have some sort of through WhatsApp groups as well. Some of them do surveys. The diaspora is an audience segment that might be easier to survey.
Right. Yeah.
But the diaspora might have different information needs or interests and the home audience as well. because they might have a slightly different information needs, basically.
In your studies, did you see any indications if the diaspora population and the home population have different priorities? Do the exiled media organizations tend to create content?
Another very good question. Some of them, when the resources are there, then they manage to target both audience groups with slightly different content. And in other cases, they simply can't because they don't have the resources available to them, but would like to tap into this audience segments, if there were more resources or funding available to them. Yeah, it's
always about resources, isn't it?
Eventually,
The subtitle of your report is Supporting Exiled Media to Survive and Sustain. Reliable revenue streams and organizational stability are critical components of survival, without which development of multi-year plans become difficult. So from the 25 exiled media organizations you studied, are there best practices on how some of them could be maximizing support from their target audiences, both financially and as a supply of necessary skill sets to ensure survival and sustained growth?
It is difficult to monetize your home audience, often because they are simply not able to pay for content.
Correct.
Or there is no payment gateways if they could. And when it comes to monetizing the diaspora audience, there was one outlet who was actually quite successful in kind of like rally among the diaspora and say, we need your help, basically, to help your fellow country people by, and they had like a membership program among diaspora that worked quite well for them. And they had like some sort of revenues. But I mean, again, exiled media outlets generally are very creative in diversifying audience, revenue streams. They offer production services, they offer consultations or translations. Some are selling ebooks, or they experiment with audience monetization, like, as I said, like membership programs or simply donations. But it is a fact that within the sample that I interviewed, 28% rely fully on donor funding, and all the other ones have some sort of kind of like alternative income streams, but still rely mainly on donor funding.
If that's okay, I mean, which exiled media organizations are doing better on this aspect? Maybe, Erisat can leverage some of their practices.
You tap into something very important, which is kind of like networking and peer learning opportunities among exiled media outlets. And I think that's something that really came out in the research as well, like that desire and need to learn from each other, from other exiled media outlets on how to precisely survive and sustain. And there is an example of a more formal exiled media network called NEMO, which I'm not sure you're aware of, but it includes regionally diverse exiled media outlets, so from different regions, and they provide a lot of practical tools. They just like published a toolbook on practical strategies for exiled media outlets, for example. And I think what's really nice about it is that it comes from the exiled media themselves for other exiled media outlets who want to learn and become more sustainable to some extent, or just like know how to survive better. And I think that's definitely something that would be great to create more networking opportunities for Exiled media outlets to learn from each other.
It seems like a chicken and egg situation. On one hand, timely breaking news and credible events analysis with verifiable information is needed to build trust and community engagement, right? But this can't happen without the community's sustained financial support. So unfortunately, social media seems to favor emotional tabloid type of engagement. Can the Exiled media organizations you studied, or any credible media for that matter, avoid these tabloid tendencies and still stay relevant?
Yeah, you ask very good questions. I had a few examples of Exiled media outlets. They deliberately say we don't create breaking news. We deliver well-researched, well-grounded content, and that just takes more time and is more resource intense. But that is something this is basically their brand, right. And this is how they sell themselves as well to their audience and create in a way that niche in the market for precisely well investigated content that takes more time. Yeah.
So they're leaning towards the analysis side instead of the breaking news.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, right.
Much more than the kind of like highly emotive. Yeah.
And finally, Dr. Isabelle, gender studies is a good part of your educational background. Did you observe gender-related differences in your research? What can be done to improve participation of women within the Exiled media organizations themselves? And more importantly, how can these Exiled media organizations increase engagement of women in their diaspora and home country populations?
It was not a question that I investigated in detail in the report, because the report was on an outlet level, more like on the operational level, like about revenues, operational models, etc. What I did observe, where there is a gender difference or where gender amplifies experience, is definitely on like digital, like online harassment and safety issues for women, like women journalists, and that they just experience in a way like another level of online abuse, if you say so, harassment or trolling to some extent, and of course like physical safety of women journalists as well has other dimensions as well. But the questions of how to engage more women audiences was not something that was specifically asked in the report, so I don't want to kind of like make any assumptions.
But the threats are more directed against women. Is that something that you found in your research?
Not necessarily more directed, but just definitely sexually more violent. Like the type of threats that they would receive, the issue of the family and children, and just like this type of threats that seems to affect women more than men.
To the women that you talked to, did this discourage them?
I'm generally humbled by the courage and the determination of all participants that I was lucky enough to talk to. They carry so much trauma with them, individually, almost like more structurally, and they carry on doing their work. despite everything. And I think that courage is really something that was very inspiring to experience. And what you might tap a bit into it is the importance of psychosocial support for exiled journalists, and how important it is to invest in people, like not invest, just like recognizing the trauma and the scars and the ongoing pressure they face now just from an exiled place. And yeah, like one outlet, like one interviewee described to me how important it was to almost have like monthly group sessions with a therapist trained in post-traumatic stress disorders, and kind of like create a sense of community within the newsroom, and help processing what they experienced, so they have the energy to carry on and do their work, which they want to do because they were all determined to continue their work.
Well, we definitely need that energy and courage to keep on keeping on, right? So overall, after you finished your studies, did it leave you optimistic about where things are heading?
I mean, there's definitely there is a recognition within the international community that supports exiled media outlets that we somehow need a more strategic or coherent way in how we support exiled media. And I think that is very encouraging, because there is kind of like that acknowledgement and the will to learn more about the needs and challenges exiled media face. I mean, am I optimistic about the state of the press freedom around the globe? I don't know. But within that, I think this report really has shown that despite all odds and challenges, independent voices don't want to get shut down. And carry on, and we as an international community can make a difference and help them finding practical ways to do to sustain.
Dr. Isabelle, thank you for the work that you've done, and I appreciate your insights on this important topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you as well. Thank you very much.